They don't end up with the best. They end up with what feels safest to their nervous system. And that truth can feel like a punch to the chest when you've been sitting there wondering how someone could lose you, how someone could walk away from the kind of love you offered and then appear to move on like it was nothing. You start imagining that the person they end up with must be extraordinary, must be more beautiful, more interesting, more effortless, more everything. Because in your mind, the only way it makes sense is if they found someone better. But avoidant patterns don't choose better, they choose safer. And safe, in an avoidant nervous system, doesn't always mean healthy, it means less activating, less demanding, less exposing, less emotionally risky. It means a relationship where they can keep control through distance, where they can avoid hard conversations, where they can stay in their comfort zone and still get companionship. It means the kind of connection where no one asks them to do the one thing that terrifies them most, to be emotionally accountable. That's why they can be drawn to you, because you are real, you are warm, you are present, you are deep, you are the kind of person who can love for real, not half love, not perform love, real love. But that kind of love asks something of them. It asks them to show up. It asks them to be consistent. It asks them to communicate when they would rather disappear. It asks them to repair when they would rather numb. It asks them to be seen. And being seen is terrifying when you've spent your life surviving by staying emotionally untouchable. So sometimes, after the relationship ends, their nervous system does what it knows best. It seeks a connection that requires less of them. Not less because the other person is less valuable, but less because the relationship is less threatening to their defenses. They find someone who doesn't ask for clarity, someone who interprets inconsistency as normal, someone who doesn't push for emotional intimacy, someone who accepts the gap between words and behavior, someone who stays even when they retreat, someone whose nervous system can live with the very distance that was slowly breaking you. And that's why it feels so confusing, because you're thinking, I would never tolerate that. I would never accept that. I would never call that love. But you have to understand, an avoidance version of safety can be built on distance, and distance can masquerade as peace when both people are used to not asking for much. So let's say it clearly, the person they end up with is not always the person who is more, it's often the person who requires less emotional risk, less vulnerability, less accountability, less consistency, less repair, less depth. And this is where your heart needs a new lens, because you've been measuring their choice like it was a prize being awarded, like love is a competition and they selected the winner. But for an avoidant, ending up with someone can be less about conscious choice and more about nervous system relief. It's not who is the best partner. It's who makes me feel least exposed, who makes me feel least pressured, who lets me keep my identity of independence, who doesn't require me to face my own limitations. And if you were the person who made it real, you were also the person who made it scary. Because the closer you get to them, the more their fear wakes up. The more their fear wakes up, the more they reach for control, and control often looks like distance. So their nervous system starts telling them, this is too much, not because you are too much, but because intimacy is too much for the version of them that hasn't healed. And when they choose someone safer, it can look like they finally settled down, but what it often means is they found a relationship that doesn't challenge their avoidance. And I know that hurts, because you're sitting there thinking, so my love wasn't enough. But let me give you the truth that will hold your heart. Your love was not the issue. Their capacity was. You were offering a full meal. They were comfortable living on snacks. You were asking for a real relationship. They were still negotiating closeness like it was a threat. So they didn't choose someone better. They chose a situation that felt easier to their nervous system. And easier is not always better. It's just less confronting. Because a relationship can last a long time when no one asks for emotional growth. A relationship can look stable when both people keep things surface level. A relationship can look peaceful from the outside, when the inside is just two people avoiding depth. Longevity is not always proof of love. Sometimes it's proof of tolerance. And this is where your healing becomes powerful, because you stop romanticizing the outcome. You stop looking at who they ended up with and assuming it's the proof you weren't enough. Instead, you see it for what it is, a reflection of what their nervous system can currently handle. You start understanding that an avoidant can choose someone safe and still feel empty. They can choose someone who doesn't challenge them and still feel restless. They can choose someone who accepts distance and still feel lonely, because distance doesn't heal fear. It just hides it. So what do you do with that truth? You stop chasing the validation of being the one they end up with, because being the one an unhealed avoidant ends up with can mean being the one who learns to tolerate pain quietly. It can mean being the one who stops asking for clarity. It can mean being the one who adapts to crumbs and calls it normal. And you don't want that kind of win. You want love that doesn't require you to betray yourself. You want love that doesn't require you to become smaller. You want love that meets your depth instead of fearing it. So your closure becomes a different question. Not, why did they choose her? Not, why did they end up with him? But, what kind of love am I no longer available for? You become the person who no longer competes for someone's capacity. You become the person who no longer thinks being chosen by someone avoidant is the ultimate proof of worth. You become the person who measures love by consistency, not by whether someone came back. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be chosen as a nervous system bargain. You were meant to be chosen as a daily decision. You were meant to be loved by someone who feels safe in closeness. Someone who doesn't need distance to breathe. Someone who can stay present when things get real. So if an avoidant ends up with someone safe, let that be the final evidence that it was never about you being less. It was about you being too real for the version of them that hasn't learned how to hold real love. And one day, you will thank yourself for not shrinking into what felt safe for them, and instead choosing what is actually safe for you. They often choose someone who accepts distance, not someone who inspires depth. And I know how painful that sounds when you were the one offering depth with your whole heart. You were the one trying to build something real. You were the one who wanted intimacy that didn't vanish in the morning. You were the one who wanted clarity, consistency, and effort, not just chemistry and late-night warmth. And then you watch them, after all the confusion and coldness, end up with someone who looks like the opposite of everything you were fighting for. Someone who seems quieter, more easygoing, more tolerant of the gaps, and your mind starts doing the cruel math. Maybe they wanted someone less. Maybe I was too much. Maybe my depth was the reason they couldn't stay. But depth is not the problem. Fear of depth is. And for an avoidant, the person who inspires depth can feel like the person who triggers danger, not because the love is wrong, but because the love is real enough to demand emotional presence. Depth asks for honesty. Depth asks for repair. Depth asks for consistency. Depth asks for the courage to be seen. And an avoidant's defenses were built precisely to avoid being seen in that way. So when they choose someone who accepts distance, it isn't always because they found a better partner. It's because they found a relationship that lets their coping strategy survive. They found a dynamic where they can keep the rules they've always lived by. Don't get too close. Don't get too vulnerable. Don't let anyone rely on you. Keep control. And the simplest way to keep those rules is to be with someone who doesn't challenge them. Someone who doesn't ask, where are we going? Someone who doesn't ask, why do you disappear? Someone who doesn't ask, can we talk about what happened? Someone who doesn't ask for emotional repairs, they just reset and move on. Someone who doesn't push for consistency, they accept inconsistency as personality. Someone who lives with distance like it's normal. And if you're a person who values depth, that can feel like a betrayal of everything you offered. Because you think, so you couldn't show up for me, but you can be with someone else. You couldn't commit to me, but you can settle down with her. But settling down with an avoidant doesn't always mean emotional intimacy. It often means emotional predictability. Predictability of distance. Predictability of low expectations. Predictability of no hard conversations. Predictability of staying in control. Because an avoidant can handle a relationship that doesn't require them to transform. They can handle a relationship where they are not required to grow. They can handle a relationship where their avoidance is never confronted, it is accommodated. And here's the part that will keep you from spiraling into comparison. Someone who accepts distance is not necessarily happier. They are simply more compatible with the avoidance defenses. Compatibility is not always about love. Sometimes it's about tolerance. Sometimes it's about how much someone is willing to live without. Sometimes it's about how much someone is willing to call normal, even when it is emotionally starving. Because two people can stay together for years while never truly being known. They can share routines, share a home, share a life on paper, and still keep their emotional worlds separate. It can look stable because nothing erupts, but nothing erupts because nothing deep is ever demanded. It can look peaceful because no one is asking for emotional presence, but the peace is built on avoidance, not intimacy. And you were not built for that kind of peace. You were built for the kind of love that holds you in the hard moments. You were built for the kind of love that communicates, repairs, and stays. You were built for a depth that doesn't have to apologize for existing. So when an avoidant chooses someone who accepts distance, what you're seeing is not proof you were too much. It's proof you were asking for something they weren't ready to provide. You were asking them to meet you in adulthood, in accountability, in emotional responsibility. And that request, even if you made it gently, even if you made it patiently, hits their nervous system like a demand for transformation. Because it is. Not transformation into someone new, transformation into someone present. Transformation into someone who can sit in discomfort. Transformation into someone who can be responsible for impact. Transformation into someone who can be consistent. And if they are not willing to do that work, they will gravitate toward a relationship that doesn't require it. They will gravitate toward someone who accepts the old pattern, because the old pattern feels safe. This is why you can be the most loving person in their life and still be the one they run from. Because love, real love, is not just comfort, it is exposure. It exposes their fear, it exposes their shame, it exposes their emotional limitations. It exposes the places where they don't know how to show up. And rather than face those exposures, many avoidants choose someone whose presence doesn't shine a light that bright. But listen, this is not a compliment to the other person, and it's not an insult to you. It's a reflection of what kind of relationship the avoidant can handle. And often, they can handle distance better than depth, because distance doesn't force them to evolve. Now, there is another path, and it matters. If an avoidant heals, truly heals, they often stop choosing distance. They start choosing secure love. They start choosing a partner who inspires depth, not because depth becomes easy, but because depth becomes safe. Healing changes what their nervous system calls safe. Healing makes closeness feel like connection instead of threat. Healing makes responsibility feel like love instead of pressure. But if they don't heal, they repeat. They repeat the pattern, choose low stakes, choose surface level, choose the dynamic that lets them avoid the very thing they secretly crave, true intimacy. And yes, deep down many avoidants do crave it, but craving and capacity are not the same. Wanting love and being able to maintain love are not the same, and you cannot build a life on someone's craving. So what do you do with this truth? You stop interpreting their choice as a verdict on your worth. You stop thinking, if I was less deep, if I asked for less, if I stayed quiet, they would have stayed. Maybe. But the kind of staying you would have gotten would have required you to abandon yourself. And that is not the win you think it is. Because if you had become the person who accepts distance, you might have kept them, but you would have lost you. And you deserve a love where you don't have to trade your depth for presence. You deserve a love where your needs don't scare someone away. You deserve a love where intimacy doesn't require you to tiptoe. So let them choose someone who accepts distance, if that is what they need to feel safe. Let them live inside the comfort of low expectations if they want. But you don't measure your worth by who tolerates less. You measure your worth by what you are no longer willing to tolerate. Because the person who inspires depth is not the one to be ashamed of. The person who inspires depth is the one who was offering real love. And real love is rare. Real love is courageous. Real love is the kind of love that the right person will not run from. The right person will rise to it. So if an avoidant didn't rise, don't shrink your depth to match their fear. Keep your standards. Keep your heart. Keep your self-respect. Because the love meant for you is not a love that is comfortable with distance. It's a love that feels safe in closeness and will meet your depth with depth. If they heal, they choose secure love. If they don't, they choose predictable patterns. And this is the part that finally releases you from the fantasy that you could have loved them into becoming different. Because when you look at who an avoidant ends up with, your mind naturally tries to create meaning. You think maybe they changed. Maybe they finally became ready. Maybe the problem was me. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe if I had been calmer, softer, less intense, they would have stayed and become the partner I wanted them to be. But the truth is, it was never about your performance. It was always about their growth. Growth changes an avoidance type. Avoidance repeats it. If they heal, they stop chasing what is easy and start choosing what is safe. If they don't heal, they stop mistaking distance for freedom and keep calling it normal. Because an avoidance nervous system has a pattern, it is drawn to what feels familiar, even when what feels familiar is emotionally limiting. Familiar can be a relationship where no one asks for intimacy. Familiar can be a partner who doesn't require emotional conversations. Familiar can be a dynamic where they can disappear and return without consequences. Familiar can be a person who accepts crumbs and calls it love. Familiar can be someone who mirrors their avoidance, so neither person has to risk being deeply seen. And that's why unhealed avoidants often end up in relationships that look stable from the outside, but are built on predictability rather than depth. Predictability is not intimacy, it's a schedule of distance. Predictability is knowing no one will demand too much. Predictability is a relationship where conflict is avoided, not repaired. Predictability is comfort without vulnerability. And to an avoidant, that can feel like safety, because it keeps them regulated. So they choose predictable patterns. They choose what lets them stay the same. They choose what doesn't force them to confront the places where they shut down. They choose what doesn't trigger their shame. They choose what allows them to keep the mask of independence without the work of emotional presence. And you, the one who wanted depth, would never fit inside that without shrinking. That's why you felt like you were always too much. Not because you were too much, but because you were asking for growth. Your love was asking them to become present. Your standards were asking them to be accountable. Your heart was asking them to repair. Your reality was asking them to stop hiding. And if they were unhealed, those requests would always feel like pressure. Not because you demanded in a harsh way, but because their nervous system experiences intimacy as exposure, and exposure triggers fear. So they respond with the same strategy: create distance, create vagueness, create a relationship that doesn't require them to evolve. That's the predictable pattern. It can look like them choosing someone who is emotionally unavailable too, because that keeps things safe. Two avoidants can orbit each other without demanding closeness. They can have companionship without intimacy, commitment without depth, stability without being deeply known. It can look like them choosing someone who is anxiously attached but exhausted, someone who will chase for years, because that gives them the feeling of being wanted without the responsibility of meeting. It can look like them choosing someone who is very independent and busy, because that means less expectation. It can look like them choosing someone who accepts their rules: don't ask too much, don't talk too deeply, don't confront too directly. And you might look at that and think, they finally found someone who fits. But what they found is someone who fits their avoidance. That is not the same as finding the love that heals them. Because healing is not about finding the perfect person, it's about becoming capable of love. If they heal, everything changes. Not suddenly, not magically, but deeply. Healing means they begin to understand their own patterns. They begin to recognize when they shut down. They begin to name what they feel instead of disappearing. They begin to tolerate closeness without panic. They begin to sit in discomfort instead of escaping it. They begin to realize that intimacy is not a trap, it's a choice. They begin to see that responsibility is not pressure, it is love in action. And when that shift happens, their idea of safe changes. Safe stops meaning low expectations. Safe starts meaning secure connection. Safe starts meaning clarity, someone who communicates. Safe starts meaning a partner who is consistent. Safe starts meaning someone with healthy boundaries. Safe starts meaning the kind of love that doesn't feel like a game, doesn't feel like a chase, doesn't feel like uncertainty. So if they heal, they often choose secure love. They choose a relationship where they don't have to perform. They choose someone who can hold closeness. They choose someone who speaks honestly. They choose someone who expects consistency. They choose a bond that requires them to stay present. And here is the most important part. Secure love doesn't feel boring to a healed nervous system. It feels like peace. But if they don't heal, secure love feels threatening. Secure love feels like being watched. Secure love feels like being required. Secure love feels like losing control. Secure love feels like exposure. So they run from it. And they end up repeating the same cycle with different faces, because the pattern is the point. The pattern keeps them safe from vulnerability, but it also keeps them lonely. And this is what you need to hold, because it protects you from wasting years waiting for an avoidant to become ready. You cannot become the reason someone heals if they are not willing to do the work. Your love can inspire, but it cannot transform a person who refuses accountability. Your patience can support, but it cannot replace self-awareness. Your devotion can be beautiful, but it cannot cure avoidance. So your closure becomes clearer. When you see who they end up with, you stop asking, "What does it say about me?" And you start asking, "What does it say about their level of healing?" Because who they choose is often a reflection of their capacity. If they choose someone who accepts distance, it reflects avoidance. If they choose someone who values secure connection, and they meet them with secure behavior, it reflects growth. And instead of longing to be the one they end up with, you begin to ask a different question. What kind of love do I want to end up in? Because the goal is not to be chosen by someone who repeats patterns. The goal is to be chosen by someone who chooses you consistently. And this is where your heart finally becomes free, because you realize you were not rejected because you lacked value. You were released because you refused to shrink into a predictable pattern. You were released because your depth was asking for a level of love they couldn't maintain. You were released so that you could find the love that doesn't require healing as a prerequisite, the love that arrives already emotionally available. So if they don't heal, they will repeat. Let them. If they do heal, they will choose secure love. Let them. But you don't build your future around which one they become. You build your future around your standards, your peace, and your willingness to choose a love that doesn't make you wait for someone else to evolve in order to be treated well. The person they end up with is often not more valuable, just more compatible with avoidance. And this is the truth that can finally stop the comparison spiral that's been eating at your confidence. Because when you see an avoidant move on, when you see them commit to someone else, when you see them posting, smiling, building a life, the first place your mind goes is the most painful place. What does she have that I didn't? What does he have that I lacked? Why did they give that person what they refused to give me? And if you're not careful, you'll turn their choice into a verdict on your worth. But an avoidance choice is often not a trophy ceremony for the best partner. It's a comfort decision for the safest dynamic. Compatibility with avoidance can look like peace, but it's often peace built on low emotional expectations. It's peace built on leaving things unsaid. It's peace built on not asking for clarity. It's peace built on accepting distance as normal. It's peace built on a relationship that doesn't require emotional courage. So yes, it can look like they chose someone better, but what they often chose is someone who fits the shape of their defenses. Someone who doesn't demand repair. Someone who doesn't challenge inconsistency. Someone who tolerates vagueness. Someone who doesn't require emotional intimacy. Someone who is busy, independent, distracted, and therefore doesn't notice the gaps as quickly. Someone who also has their own avoidance, so both people can stay comfortable in emotional distance. And that compatibility is not always love. It's often a shared agreement to not go too deep. And that's why it hurts you so much. Because you are not built for that kind of agreement. You wanted the truth. You wanted the conversation. You wanted the emotional safety. You wanted to be chosen in a way that was felt, not just declared. You wanted a relationship that could survive honesty. But honesty is exactly what avoidance runs from. So the avoidant ends up with someone who allows the avoidance to continue. And it can last a long time, because nothing forces change. It can last because the relationship is not asking them to become emotionally present. It can last because the partner doesn't push on the wound. It can last because the partner accepts the bare minimum as normal. It can last because no one is insisting on deep intimacy. And from the outside, that can look like success, because humans mistake longevity for health. Humans mistake a ring for emotional maturity. Humans mistake pictures for peace. But a relationship that lasts is not automatically a relationship that nourishes. Sometimes a relationship lasts because it never touches the places where truth would require growth. So if you're comparing yourself, stop for a second and ask, is that the love I actually want? A love that works because I don't ask for much? Is that the relationship I dreamed of? One where my needs are reduced so someone else can stay comfortable? Is that the win? To be chosen because I'm compatible with their avoidance? Because that is the hard truth. Being compatible with avoidance often means being compatible with less love than you deserve. It means being compatible with distance, compatible with silence, compatible with emotional vagueness, compatible with inconsistency, compatible with no repair, compatible with always feeling like something is missing but never naming it. And you might say, but they look happy. Of course they look happy, because appearance is easy, performance is easy, and avoidants are often very good at the outward version of relationships. They can do routines, they can do stability, they can do companionship, they can do the practical parts. What they struggle with is emotional depth, emotional responsibility, the uncomfortable conversations that build true intimacy. So if they end up with someone who doesn't require that depth, it will look smoother. Less conflict, less tension, less emotional demand. And that can look like happier, but often it's simply less confronting. And if that's what they need right now, that's their journey. But your journey is not to measure yourself against the person who fits inside their defenses. Your journey is to refuse to shrink into a relationship that only works when you silence yourself. Because the deeper pain here is not that they ended up with someone else. It's the belief that their choice proves you weren't enough. And I want you to replace that belief with something true. Their choice proves what kind of relationship they were capable of, not what kind of love you deserved. You deserve consistency. You deserved emotional presence. You deserved repair. You deserved clarity. You deserved someone who doesn't need distance to feel safe. And if you were the person who asked for those things, then of course you would feel incompatible with avoidance, because you were built for intimacy. You were built for love that grows. You were built for a relationship that can handle honesty without punishing you for it. So when they choose someone more compatible with avoidance, it doesn't mean that person is more valuable. It means that person's needs align with the avoidance limitations, or that person is willing to tolerate those limitations. And tolerance is not the same as being treasured. Tolerance is not the same as being met. Tolerance is not the same as being loved in a way that nourishes your soul. This is why the comparison game is a trap. It makes you envy someone who may be living in the exact dynamic you refuse to accept. It makes you want a relationship that works, because you don't ask for emotional presence. It makes you wish you had been quieter, easier, less you. But the best version of you is not the version that can survive crumbs. The best version of you is the version that refuses them. So your healing is to stop asking, why did they choose her? And start asking, what did I learn about what I will no longer tolerate? Your healing is to stop trying to be compatible with avoidance and start choosing compatibility with secure love. Secure love is not someone who ends up with you because it's convenient. Secure love chooses you clearly, consistently, and proudly. And if you ever need proof that you're not less, remember this: the avoidant often treats the person who inspires depth as the most threatening person. Not because that person is wrong, but because that person exposes the truth. And truth is uncomfortable to someone who survives by avoiding it. So if you were too real for them, that is not a flaw. It is a sign that you are asking for the right things from the wrong capacity. And one day, you will meet someone whose nervous system doesn't call your love pressure. Someone whose nervous system calls your love home. Someone who doesn't need you to become compatible with avoidance. Someone who is compatible with your depth, your standards, your honesty, your heart. So let them end up with who they end up with. Let them choose what feels safe to them. But don't let their choice drag you into a life where you try to become smaller just to be kept. Because being kept by avoidance is not the victory you think it is. The real victory is being loved in a way that you don't have to recover from.